Very warm greetings, everyone. Welcome to the special lecture series of sign language. I'm Dr. Pooja Sharma, presenting with Manisha Sharma, the fundamentals of environmental economics. And under this series of fundamentals of environmental economics, today this lecture is devoted to environmental markets, part 1. The learning objectives of this particular lecture is to understand the designing of environmental markets, to explore the market-based instruments used in United States and Europe, to understand the mechanism of cap and trade policies, and to critically evaluate various types of cap and trade policies. Now, this lecture is devoted like a case study, the real live examples from the field of US and Europe, how these instruments have really helped, or they have not helped, or they have critically evaluated them according to the real situation scenario. As you all know from the earlier series, the earlier lectures, that environmental regulations can be done in two ways. One is command and control, the other is market-based instruments. So command and control policies are used by the government, and they are used widely across nations to design environmental regulations, and by allocating tradable rights to emit pollution, and it is considered as one of the measures to reduce emissions across. The tradable rights to pollute are widely referred to as command and control. So the fundamental aspect or the basis of command and control is right to pollute, and that is tradable right to pollute. Command and control policy, under this there are two options of implementing the policy. First option is setting uniform emission limits, which are also called as permits or allowances. Second is specifying the pollution control equipment, that it is mandatory to use such a equipment by the government or by law. So you kind of define the equipment to be used. The other way is compliant cost of reducing pollution typically varies among various sources. It is already well known fact. Depending on the age of the machinery or the structure, depending upon the technology, the characteristic and operating conditions. So as a result, aggregate abatement costs under command and control, approaches are also likely to vary a lot, and then they are greater than that is to be needed. So if you consider the abatement costs, they are really costly and expensive as compared to the other instruments. However, the market-based instrument, the second alternate of instrument for reducing emissions, it incorporates establishing a price on pollutant emissions, either directly through the taxes or indirectly through the market or tradable rights. They are also called as permits or allowances. Market-based approaches equates marginal abatement cost rather than the emission levels. So here we are looking at the cost of emitting, and we equate what is the optimal situation, that you equate marginal abatement costs across all the firms, and thereby the principle of equimarginal principle is maintained in this particular instrument to achieve the pollution control targets at the minimum cost, and that is definitely cost effective as compared to the command and control. Market-based instrument, under the class of tradable permits, there is a special instrument called as cap and trade. It is one of the commonly used mechanism apart from the emission reduction credits or offset systems. Market-based environmental policy instrument includes both quantity mechanisms such as cap and trade, where you try to reduce the quantity of emission, and offset system, as well as pollution charges, which are fines, which are the emission taxes, and deposit fund system, refund systems. So you earn credit in terms of monetary credits, money, if you reduce emissions. So there are two ways of doing it. Either you reduce the quantity or you earn credits. Market design of cap and trade system. Now this particular lecture presents the cap and trade system which is implemented in United States. There are around 8 types of cap and trade system which have been implemented across US and Europe. So it's a case study which we will be presenting here, and to evaluate how successful they are in achieving their objectives of reducing pollution. First example, or you can say case study, is the US Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, which is a leaded gasoline phase down in 1980s. So this was implemented in 1980s, so long back, and let us see whether it came out to be successful or not. Second is the sulfur dioxide allowance trading program under the Clean Air Act amendment of 1990. So after 1990, this was the second majorly implemented program for emission reduction. Third case study is about nitrogen oxide trading in the eastern part of United States. Similarly, we move on to the fourth case study, which is regional clean air incentives market in Southern California. The fifth case study is regional greenhouse gas initiative in northeast of United States. The sixth case study would be California's AB 32 cap and trade system. Seventh would be the European Union emission trading system, which we all know it is a remarkable breakthrough in the entire class of instruments used for reducing emissions and creating environmental markets. Now we move on to the first type of case study, which is related to United States. Leaded gasoline phase down. It was contended that lead was required in gasoline in new United States cars which were introduced in 1975 to reduce emissions of carbon monoxide and unburned hydrocarbons. So lead was introduced to reduce that, and in 1980s US EPA Environmental Protection Act, under that it began to phase down the lead in gasoline to 10% of its original level. To attain this, a trading program was launched in 1982 to allow a greater flexibility in meeting the emission targets or standards. Now, how it was implemented, cap and trade policy, which was first time implemented in United States in 80s, and how it was done. Refineries that produced gasoline with a lower lead content than that was required, they earned lead credits. So it is very simple that if you produce gasoline without and with a lesser amount of lead in it, then you will earn credits, lead credits. They were called as lead credits. No explicit allocation of permits were there, but to the degree that firms' production level were correlated over time, then the system implicitly awarded property rights to the basis of historical levels of gasoline production, because by now many firms would have contributed to the gasoline production over the past years historically. So how do you tackle that? Under the banking provision of the program, excess reduction could be banked for later use. So providing an incentive for the early reduction to help meet the lower limits that will exist during the later years of the phase down. So you will always earn credit on that. The trading program resulted in leaded gasoline. Now, what was the impact of this particular leaded gasoline phase down? The impact is crystal clear that first, the trading program resulted in the leaded gasoline being removed from the market. faster than the program was relatively cost effective. More than 60% of the lead added to the gasoline associated with the traded lead credits in each of the year of the program. The system was terminated at the end of 1987 when the lead phase down was completed and meeting the environmental targets. So it was a remarkable success in meeting the environmental targets, and in 1987 it was introduced in 80s, and 1987 we see that it was completely phased out. Then the program validated that a cap and trade system could be environmentally effective and economically cost effective. Banking played a very important role in this by comprising of significant share of gains from the trade. The rules should be clearly defined upfront without any ambiguity. So this was the learning message from this particular case study of a leaded gasoline phase down. Now we move on to the second case study from US itself. In the late 1980s, there was a growing concern in United States and other countries about the acid precipitation, which was mainly due to the emission of sulfur dioxide SO2 from the coal-fired power plants reacting in the atmosphere in order to form the sulfuric acid, which was damaging the forest and aquatic ecosystem all around. Consequently, US Clean Air Act Amendment of 1990 launched SO2 allowance trading program, reducing the total annual emission by half relative to the 1980 level. So this was again a second success of cap and trade policy. How this cap and trade policy was implemented, this was named as sulfur dioxide allowance trading. So the trading, earlier we see that was a lead trading, and now we are looking at the sulfur dioxide trading. The power plants were given allowances denominated in tons of SO2 emissions, based initially on actual emissions during the period 1985 to 87, with allocation of demarcated by the vintage and the total number decreasing for successive years, thereby establishing and declining cap. So initially the cap is too high, and later on we see as SO2 levels keep on declining, the cap also keep on declining. If the annual emission at the regulated facility exceeded the allowance allocated to that facility, the owner could buy the allowance or reduce the emissions. So this was the advantage given, that an owner has the flexibility of buying the allowance and selling the allowance. If the emission, on the other hand, if we see the other case, if the emissions at the regulated facility were reduced below the allowance allocation, then the facility owner could sell the extra allowance or bank them for the future use. So there was a leverage, or you can say the privilege of keeping the extra allowance with you. Later on you can use them or even sell them. It was assumed that the value of the free allowance should be passed on to the consumers and would not generate the windfall profit to the providers. This was a remarkable guideline that was introduced, that the consumers should not be at harm or at loss. It is basically the consumers would be gaining out of it, and while the producers will not get any profit out of it, because then they would have been the case of vested interest and lot of political lobbying could have been done. Moreover, the political value of being able to allocate free allowances to address the differential economic impacts across regions and states and other districts, that was very substantial. So it had the political value attached with it, and which could have been tapped by then parties and political systems. This is because the equilibrium allocation of pollution permits after trading has occurred and it is independent of initial allocation. That is the application of the Coase theorem, which we all know, remarkable theorem in very widely known theorem in environmental economics. So one can say that the initial allocation of this kind of allowance was not, it was independent of what you are actually achieving the allocation in the equilibrium after trading. So it doesn't matter how the permits, or you can say allowances, are allocated initially. Therefore, the initial allocation of allowance could be designed to ensure the greatest political support also, without fear that this would jeopardize the system, environmental performance or economic cost. So it was taking care of everything. Because it is not politically, even if you use it politically for gaining the votes and for the political vested interest, then also the environmental aspect or the performance is not harmed. It is not, there is no drawback on the account of environmental performance or economic cost, even if the political vested interests come into picture or come in between. So the result of this introduction of this particular trading, allowance trading, which is sulfur dioxide emissions from electric power plants decreased 36% between 1990 to 2004. It was again a remarkable achievement. Emission reduction occurred more quickly than expected because utilities banked allowances for future use. So this banking system of using the allowances in future, it came out to be very, very beneficial and fruitful for the system. The program did not generate significant hotspots or geographical concentrations. That is very important because generally all the implementation of policies are linked with politics and political opinions and political vote bank, but it did not lead to any generation of a hotspot or geographical concentration or vested interest or concentration of power in some region or the other. There is evidence that program brought down the abatement cost over the time by providing incentive for innovation also. So it came out to be an incentive for innovating technologies which produce lesser sulfur dioxide. Further, the costs were at least 15% below and perhaps as much as 90% below costs of various counterfactual policies which were implemented along with it. So it exhibited a greater benefit as compared to other policies. Initial allocation can be used to address issues of distributional equity. So initial allocation, since it is not, because of Coase theorem, it is not affecting the quantity of emission produced or the quantity of the final distribution of allowances. So it also helped government to kind of settle down with the distributional aspect of economic problem. Then the other results of this particular policy were intra-sector emissions leakage can be minimized by including all sources within the sector above the same capacity or emission levels. A robust allowance market can be fostered through a cap and trade policy and through a cap that significantly below the business as usual BAU emissions combined with unrestricted trading and banking. So it's a major breakthrough or you can say a learning message or learning outcome from this particular case study of SO2 that this particular allowance format or framework for market, only when it is implemented at a very lower level than the business as usual and it is combined with the unrestricted trading along with the banking system, banking of SO2 will definitely lead a very favorable results on environment. Now we move on to the third case study of trading system that is in United States, that is about NOx, nitrogen oxides, trading in the eastern part of United States. In 1999, under US EPA guidelines, 11 states and the District of Columbia developed and implemented NOx budget program, a regional NOx cap and trade system. To conduct the advice of health effects of ground level ozone, the program aimed to cut the summertime ground level ozone by more than 50% relative to the 1990 levels. So this was the aim of in order to achieve this particular policy was implemented. So the aim was to reduce ozone at the ground level. In 1998, EPA required 21 eastern states to submit the plan to reduce their emissions from more than 2,500 sources. An interstate cap and trade program known as NOx budget trading program was introduced. The states were given allowances to allocate in-state sources. So this was a very different type of policy implementation, where the states were empowered with the allowances, because the important part is that the focus is on the sources. Result of this NOx are also very fruitful. NOx budget program, and like these results will be discussed after a short break.